You tell yourself it'll only take an hour. Then you make coffee. Then you check your email. Then, for some reason, you reorganize the spice drawer. Now it's midnight. The thing still isn't done. You're not lazy. You're not stupid. And you're definitely not alone. But the guilt doesn't care about any of that. It creeps in around the edges, quiet, sharp. You knew you had time. You knew what needed to happen. So why didn't you move? Most people think procrastination is just bad time management. They say you need to focus, build habits, use a timer. But none of that works when your chest tightens just thinking about the task. It's not the clock that's beating you. It's something older, quieter, closer to fear. This is the part nobody wants to talk about. Procrastination feels like failure, but it actually starts as self-protection. Not from danger, but from discomfort. Your brain treats certain tasks like threats. Not because they're hard, but because of what they mean. That deadline? It's not just a date, it's a test. Proof of whether you're competent, smart, reliable, worthy. And somewhere deep inside, a part of you isn't sure. So you avoid the task. Not because you don't care, but because you care too much. And that's the trap. Because the more you avoid, the worse it feels. And the worse it feels, the more your brain flags it as dangerous. Until eventually, the smallest step feels impossible. What looks like laziness from the outside is often dread on the inside. Not just about the work, but about what doing the work says about you. That's the cycle. And it doesn't break with shame. It breaks with understanding. Let's start there. Procrastination is often treated like a productivity glitch. Something to be patched with better tools, sharper focus, stricter routines. That's the dominant view. Apps, planners, time blocks. These are the weapons handed out to fight the delay. The message is simple. You're just disorganized. You're just undisciplined. Fix your schedule, fix yourself. That narrative is everywhere. Self-help books, YouTube coaches, even your boss. And it seems to make sense. After all, the pattern is obvious. You delay, you scramble, you suffer. So the fix must be to stop delaying. Start earlier, push harder, manage your time. But it doesn't work. Not consistently, not for long. Because it misunderstands what procrastination really is. The assumption is that it's about time, that it's a matter of planning and willpower. So when the usual tools fail, people don't question the tools. They question themselves. Maybe I'm just lazy. Maybe I don't want it enough. Maybe I'm broken. This is where shame starts to grow. Quietly at first, but it builds. Every missed deadline, every last-minute rush reinforces the idea that something is wrong with you. And the more you believe that, the more your brain links work with pain. That's the surface layer, a system that tells you the problem is your behavior and that the solution is pressure. So you try to white-knuckle your way through it. You tell yourself, just get it done. And sometimes you do, but not always. Because pressure might get you started once or twice, but it doesn't remove the thing that made you freeze in the first place. The irony is that many procrastinators are not lazy or weak. They're often perfectionists, overachievers, people who've learned that their worth depends on performance. People who fear failure, not just because it's uncomfortable, but because it threatens their identity. So while the world sees procrastination as a time problem, for many, it's actually an emotional one. Not about avoiding tasks, but avoiding what those tasks represent. That misunderstanding leads to bad advice. And bad advice leads to cycles people can't escape. They keep trying the same tactics. They keep blaming themselves when they fail. And the root cause stays buried, quiet, untouched, and very much in control. Procrastination doesn't start with laziness. It starts with a signal. Not one you hear, but one you feel. A quiet tension in your chest, a sudden heaviness in your limbs, a restless urge to do anything else. That's not a random glitch, it's your nervous system pulling rank. Beneath the surface, procrastination is a stress response. When you think about a task that feels overwhelming, uncertain, or high stakes, your brain reads it as a threat. Not the kind you run from, but the kind you freeze in front of. Your amygdala, the part of your brain that handles fear, activates. Cortisol rises. Your body prepares for conflict, even though there's no real danger. Just a blank page. Just a spreadsheet. Just a conversation you don't want to have. And here's the critical part. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for decision-making and long-term planning, takes a back seat. Not because you're weak, but because your system is prioritizing short-term safety over long-term reward. So, your brain redirects you. Scroll a feed, clean the kitchen, anything to reduce the tension. This isn't laziness, it's regulation. And the more emotionally loaded the task is, the stronger this response becomes. A report that affects your job, a message that could trigger conflict, a goal tied to your self-worth. The higher the stakes, the stronger the freeze. Not because the task is difficult, but because your identity feels tied to the outcome. People who struggle with emotional regulation, especially those with histories of trauma, perfectionism, or rejection, are more prone to this. Their nervous systems learned early that certain situations were unsafe. Criticism, failure, disappointment. So they learn to avoid those outcomes at all costs, even if it means sabotaging themselves. This is how procrastination becomes a loop. You avoid the task to reduce stress, but the avoidance creates consequences, which raise the stress. Over time, your brain starts associating the task with both failure and shame. It's not just hard, it becomes radioactive. And you can't logic your way out of that. You can't schedule your way out either because the resistance isn't mental, it's physiological. The tools built for time management don't work here because the problem isn't time, it's threat perception. Your brain isn't malfunctioning, it's protecting you. But the threat it sees isn't real, it's a story, a meaning, a memory. And unless that part gets addressed, no planner, app, or productivity hack is going to change much. If the mechanism behind procrastination is so clear, why doesn't seeing it stop it? Why doesn't the insight translate into action? Because the resistance isn't intellectual, it's emotional. It doesn't care what you know, it only cares what you feel. When a task carries emotional weight, your brain categorizes it as a risk, and no amount of self-awareness cancels that alarm. You can know exactly why you're procrastinating and still not be able to move, because the resistance lives in the body, not just the mind. It's a survival reflex, not a logic puzzle. And this is where most people get stuck. They beat themselves up for not doing the thing, not realizing that every hit of guilt reinforces the threat. Now, the task isn't just a trigger for fear, it's a trigger for shame. And shame is paralyzing. It doesn't motivate, it floods. This is why advice like just do it fails. It assumes the only barrier is laziness or poor planning. It overlooks the quiet war happening inside. A war between the part of you that wants progress and the part of you that remembers pain. The memory of being criticized. The feeling of being not enough. The fear of proving it true. That internal conflict creates friction. Not the loud kind, the slow, grinding kind that wears you down without making a sound. You don't fight it with more pressure. You can't discipline your way through it. Because the resistance isn't about willpower, it's about protection. And you don't override protection, you have to build trust. But that takes time and patience. Two things modern culture doesn't offer. We've been conditioned to treat productivity as proof of worth. So when we fall short, we don't just feel behind, we feel defective. The system doesn't leave room for emotional friction. You're either performing or failing. And in that binary, there's no space for reflection, repair, or re-entry. That's why procrastination lingers. Not because people are broken, but because the system they're in punishes slowness, punishes pause, and rewards the appearance of control over the reality of it. Procrastination isn't a failure to act. It's often a failure to feel safe enough to act. The shift doesn't happen through force. It doesn't come from pushing harder, waking up earlier, or shaming yourself into discipline. That just deepens the groove, makes the task heavier. The shift begins when you stop trying to overpower the resistance and start understanding what it's protecting. Most procrastinators aren't avoiding work. They're avoiding what the work might confirm. That they're not good enough, not capable, not ready. And that fear isn't loud. It doesn't scream. It hums beneath the surface unnoticed until you try to move forward and stall. The real shift happens when you stop treating the fear as an enemy and start listening to it, not indulging it, not obeying it, just recognizing that it's there. That part of you is scared, not lazy, scared. And that changes the whole dynamic, because fear softens when it's acknowledged. Shame dissolves when it's named. This isn't about coddling yourself, it's about accuracy. Because when you look at your own avoidance with clarity instead of judgment, you stop reinforcing the story that you're defective. And that's what makes movement possible. Not motivation, not hacks, just a little less fear. That's the quiet shift. When you realize the task isn't the problem, the meaning you've tied to it is, and meaning can be changed. Not through affirmations, through exposure, through small, safe action. A 5-minute version of the task, a half-finished attempt. Not because that's all you can do, but because it's enough to disarm the threat, to prove your nervous system wrong, not by yelling over it, by showing it gently that it doesn't need to protect you from this. Over time, that changes the signal. The task goes from threat to neutral, and once it's neutral, it becomes workable. Not easy, but possible. And possible is enough. That's what breaks the loop. Not crushing the fear, calming it, replacing alarm with familiarity, and giving your system evidence that you're not in danger anymore. The unspoken rule behind procrastination is simple but heavy. You believe your worth is on the line. Every task becomes more than just a task. It becomes a test, a verdict, proof that you're smart enough, capable enough, disciplined enough to deserve respect, maybe even to deserve rest. That belief isn't loud. It lives in the background, but it shapes everything. It's what turns small assignments into pressure cookers. It's what makes just start feel like a trap. Because if you start and fail, the mask comes off. People might see what you've been hiding, and worse, you might see it yourself. This is the root most advice never touches. Not because it's hard to understand, but because it's uncomfortable to say. We've built a culture that equates performance with identity. If you work hard, you're valuable. If you're productive, you're good. If you stop moving, something must be wrong. So we internalize that message early. Be useful. Be impressive. Be perfect. And when we inevitably fall short, we panic. Because we don't just risk missing a deadline, we risk confirming the fear that we are not enough. That's the unspoken rule. You're only as good as what you produce. And if you believe that, then every task becomes a minefield. It's not just about completing the work. It's about proving you belong. This pressure creates a strange paradox. The more something matters to you, the harder it becomes to face. Not because of the task itself, but because of what it threatens to reveal. You avoid it, not because you don't care, but because you care too much. And deep down, you don't think you can afford to fail. That's the lie at the center of chronic procrastination. That failure means something about you. That one bad result erases every strength. That your worth resets every morning. Until that belief is broken, the cycle continues. You'll keep trying to earn peace instead of just having it. You'll keep chasing self-worth through achievement. And you'll keep freezing whenever the bar feels too high. But once you see it clearly, the rule starts to lose power. You realize the task isn't a test of your identity. It's just a task. The pressure isn't real. You created it, and you can release it. If procrastination is tied to threat, then the solution isn't more pressure. It's less. The goal isn't to force action through guilt. It's to remove just enough weight so the next step feels possible. Not ideal, not perfect, just possible. Start with reframing the task. Don't call it finishing the project. Call it opening the document. Don't say write the report. Say write one bad paragraph. Your brain responds to threats, not logic. The smaller the step, the safer it feels. You're not trying to win. You're trying to lower the temperature. Next, stop trying to get motivated. That's unreliable. Instead, build a ritual. Use a specific chair, a certain playlist, a drink you only pour when you're working. These cues bypass the internal debate. They don't need willpower. They just shift your brain into a different mode through pattern, not pressure. Set a time boundary, not a performance goal. Don't aim to finish the whole thing. Work for 15 minutes. That's it. Then walk away if you want. Often, momentum takes over. But even if it doesn't, you've won. You showed up, and that rewires the fear. Remove passive distractions. Not because you're weak, but because your brain is wired to take the easier path. Make that path harder. Move your phone. Block your default tabs. Keep your tools visible and your temptations out of reach. Not forever, just for the first 5 minutes. That's where the shift begins. And when you do slip, and you will, don't make it personal. Don't turn a delay into a character flaw. Just reset. No punishment, no lecture. The more gently you treat the failure, the faster your nervous system recovers. Self-compassion isn't indulgent, it's tactical. It keeps the task from becoming radioactive. Ask better questions. Instead of, why am I like this? Try, what about this task feels threatening? Instead of, how do I fix myself? Try, what fear am I protecting right now? You're not broken. You're bracing. You're And finally, remember that productivity isn't morality. You're not a better person when you work. You're just a person doing a thing. That's it. You can be imperfect and still move. You can fall behind and still return. You don't need to earn your way out of the loop. You just need to take one small step, safely, repeatedly, till your system learns that action doesn't equal danger anymore. Procrastination isn't about laziness. It's not about time. It's about protection. Your brain has learned to equate certain tasks with risk, emotional, psychological, even existential, so it hesitates. Not because it doesn't care, but because it cares too much. Most systems you've been taught ignore this. They treat delay as a failure of discipline. They tell you to push harder, plan better, try more. But you've tried, and the cycle keeps repeating. What breaks it isn't more pressure, it's less fear. Procrastination shrinks when the threat shrinks, when the task becomes just a task, when your self-worth isn't tied to the outcome, when you stop believing that effort needs to prove something. You don't need a new routine. You need a new story. One where doing something slowly doesn't mean you're behind. One where unfinished doesn't mean unworthy. One where rest isn't a reward you earn, but a baseline you start from. You won't fix this overnight, but you don't have to. You just have to see it clearly, respond to it calmly, and act, not from fear, not from shame, but from a grounded place. The loop ends there, not with a breakthrough, with a choice. So here's the question. If nothing about you had to be proven, what would you still choose to do?